Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome to another Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. And Kevin, it's a big time week. We finally got basketball on the horizon. Hard to believe, but that Kansas exhibition coming up for the Razorbacks, the number one Kansas Jayhawks coming to Bud Walton Arena on Friday. We'll get to that a little bit later, but let's first talk about a couple big time visitors for Arkansas coming in over the weekend. A rough football performance for the Razorbacks on the gridiron, but a whole host of visitors for Cal coming in, and to no surprise, a whole lot of big name targets for the Hogs on campus this weekend.
Christian Jr., class of 2025, national number 5 player, a 5-star. Really, when you look at him, 6'11", 7'4" wingspan, 9'3" standing reach. He's a guy that projects at minimum as a stretch 4 at the college level, potentially a 4-5 combo as he gets stronger and improves defensively. But to me, it's the biggest big time when you look at prolific big men recruits. So you have to go back to Khalil Ware a few years ago, class of 2022, when he visited Arkansas as it was getting close to that early signing period. Of course, he ended up signing with Oregon, transferred to Indiana, first-round draft pick in this last draft. But it's that kind of weight in terms of, you see 5-stars in John Calipari. There's been multiple on campus. But when you're talking frontline guys, they don't grow on trees with those measurables. He's athletic. He's skilled. He's the prototype for today's stretching, bigs that can space the floor, stretch the floor because of their shooting ability. So he's the headliner. He's taken multiple visits. Arkansas's in his final 7. And so we'll keep an eye on that. LSU, he's from Baton Rouge. Speaking of LSU being in town for football, you had Shaquille O'Neal in Fayetteville, former LSU, walking up on recruits at dinner over the weekend. But Sanak, we'll see. But LSU supposedly getting the last visit in November. The early signing period is, I think, the 13th to the 20th. So we'll keep an eye on that. I mid-visit, I got a report that, he was really impressed with Arkansas. And so, recruits say those things. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's kind of blah. Every once in a while it's like that. So it's what do we take away from that? I don't know. I do think Arkansas is obviously, if you get them on campus, it's John Calipari. You're going to probably be in the mix till the end. A couple of more visitors. This was the busiest visit weekend for one weekend. 2 weeks ago when Arkansas upset Tennessee, you had one committed 5-star, Darius Acuff Jr., a guard, Malik Thomas, who Arkansas is maybe close to getting closer to wrapping that up. We'll see. I'm not 100% convinced he ends up a Razorback, but I'm leaning heavily that way that he will. But you had those two on campus 2 weeks ago. This weekend it was 3. So in addition to Christian Jr., class of 2026, national number 13 rated player according to On3 Sports, Abdou Toure, a 6'6" wing out of West Haven, Connecticut, at Notre Dame High School there. Really a young man that he's from Guinea. He had a 50-point game in the FIBA U17 World Cup over the summer. And then in the Under Armour next Elite 24 All-Star game, we had a lot of 5-stars from the 25 and 26 class. He hit the game-winning shot in that and had 16 points, 7 of 9 shooting. And a young man that's picked up a ton of offers since August, including Arkansas. That's when Calipari offered him. He was on an unofficial visit over the weekend, as was class of 2027, will be a sophomore in high school, Devin Cleveland, a 6'3" guard out of Chicago. ESPN ranks him the 11th best player in that class, another 5-star, also on an unofficial visit. So busiest visit weekend so far for John Calipari, and it's really ramped up. If you remember, Acuff visited back in May. Then it was really quiet. It seemed like forever. Arkansas didn't really have a marquee home game in September. Only one game against Alabama, Birmingham for football. It ended up being no visitors that weekend. But in the last month, Arkansas's had, let me count them up in my head now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 visitors. 7 visitors when you count Mika Murnin, class of 2026, 5-star, who may reclass eventually to 2025, and Sean Abayev, class of 2025, a top 25 rated player. The only one that's technically right now 5-star, I think he's 5-star value. I don't think there's more than, there's not 15 players better than him. Out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 6'7" wing that visited a few weeks ago. So the visits have ramped up. We're getting closer and closer to that early signing period. A lot of 5-star guys, Jacob, will drag it out and wait till the spring. But Calipari gets some locked up as well. We know Acuff. We've talked about it forever. Top 5 rated guy, already committed. I think Arkansas feels good about getting at least 2, potentially 3 players, not only committed, but signed early.
Yeah, and it reminds me of something where just it was slow at first in terms of the visits, and now it's kind of ramped up a little bit. And I remember
Yeah.
you saying a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago now, time is flying, where you said eventually it'll get to the point to where you're not going to have enough fingers and toes, right, to count the amount of visitors that Cal has on campus. And we're starting to get into that window. It should be interesting to see where guys sign ultimately in terms of early period or later on. But regardless, great to see
Yeah.
Cal bringing in a bunch of visitors. And he obviously was center stage at SEC Media Days this week in Birmingham. And we talked a little bit before getting on here. It wasn't as if it was anything groundbreaking from Cal. We heard a lot of what we've heard in terms of the media availability he's done here in Arkansas, but it was, you know,
Yeah.
I thought it was important that he continued to kind of emphasize the philosophy shift of the program, right? Where he was asked about, what have you learned throughout this process? And he echoed once again that he's really had to shift from the standpoint that he's learned you cannot have a team of 7 or 8 freshmen, right? 18 years old going up against 23, 24-year-old guys on other teams. And that's something that has obviously been his bread and butter throughout the whole process. But he talked about that as well as kind of emphasizing physicality and defense, something that last year's Kentucky team could fly up and down the court offensively. They couldn't really get stops. I thought in terms of emphasizing that philosophy, it was something that he really wanted to make sure that people knew about this year's Arkansas team coming up.
I agree with the points you just made. I think because we've heard the talking point so much of drilling down the rotation to 8 or 9,
Yeah.
Having a better balance and a fewer. I mean, his freshman class is only a third
Yeah.
of the top 9 rotation. That's different than what he's done. We've heard it a lot, but first time in front of media outside of Arkansas for a while now.
Yeah.
So it does bear repeating. I do think it's key. He's been talking about physicality for a few weeks, including SC Media Days, and it being something that he feels like is going to help this team defensively. I thought it was a question mark back in the summer. Then I saw the weight that Trevor in Brazil, the strength and weight he put on, his attitude that we both saw, and the way that he was attacking. It was practice, but that's all we'd see so far, and so far so good. Big Z looked like he put on weight. Jonas Adu's a big man. And I think the difference when he talks about that physicality, it's not just physicality. I think the other part is you got a lot of veteran qualities on that front line. Jonas Adu, a proven SEC big man in his 4th year now, all SEC defensive team and all SEC second team last year. Trevor Brazil's made the rounds. I mean, he's in year 4 in college, even though he's had a lot of injuries. And then even Big Z's got some at least part of a year under his belt, and Adu Thero, who's going to help give depth, lend depth to that front line, will be in his 3rd year of college basketball. So if you looked at Kentucky's front line last year, thin, lightweight guys, but freshmen, one sophomore, and there wasn't a lot of girth, beef, or experience. So I think in addition to being maybe having the capability of playing a more physical brand, there's a lot more experience and relevant experience, again, with Adu and what he's done in the SEC. And I think the other thing is, I think some of Arkansas's guards will be able to play a physical brand of defense. The only other thing that stood out to me is the fact that as we get closer to this Kansas game, he's still talking about guys being beat, the team being beat up and guys still out. And same talking point as we got a couple of days before that, when he said, look, we may not roll guys out for that Kansas game if they're not ready. We're not going to put guys out there too soon for the expense of winning an exhibition game. So even though that may not seem like it matters that much because it's an exhibition game, you still want to put your best foot forward. You still hope everybody's back and ramping up at the start of the season. And we're going to get some answers to that because that game's just a few days away.
Yeah, he was forward about that. He said both I and Coach Self, obviously talking about Bill Self at Kansas, are never going to throw somebody out there for an exhibition that's not ready, because it just doesn't make any sense. As much as everybody's excited about it, right? You got the #1 team coming into Fayetteville. If somebody's not ready to go, you save them for the beginning of the season, especially given the type of tests that Arkansas has early in the season. But just the defense and physicality aspect of it, it's going to be interesting seeing that get tested against Kansas, right? Because it's hard to find a better team when you talk about Hunter Dickinson and all the talent that they have. Right away, Arkansas is going to be tested defensively. And at least on paper, we talked about it in the summer, this team is athletic. They're going to be able to switch defensively. And when you talk about even ball handling offensively, athleticism is just all over this roster, with the exception of Big Z and Jonas Adu. Everybody can fly around the court and handle the ball. And Kansas is going to be a really fascinating test for this team, defensively, offensively, all around, because this team hasn't played together in live format. And you talk about the number one team coming in, immediately testing the Razorbacks. It's going to be so much fun to watch.
Well, and you've got Hunter Dickinson, who's been around
Yeah.
for a while, a mountain of a man.
20 years,
It there's
seems like.
there, so you don't know who's going to be on the court for Arkansas just
Yeah.
yet. But let's just throw it out there. Let's say that everybody's full, all hands on deck. To me, one of the things you want to do is make him work defensively, really make him work and exert, because a big guy like that takes a lot of fuel to keep that thing going for 40 minutes or however long he's on the court. So Arkansas wants to play with pace and they want to share the ball. If they're able to do that on offensively, they can get Hunter Dickinson and some matchup problems for him, because I don't think is going to move as well as Arkansas is trying to play. A lot of that's on Jonas Adu, who's been dealing with that foot injury. If they let him run and he plays, I don't know that he's at full speed. So that may be a situation where it kind of lets Hunter Dickinson off the hook. They've got KJ Adams. They got key guys coming back. They always recruit well. I mean, they're the number one team in the country, right? I mean, they won a national title just 3 years ago. Arkansas upset them as a number one seed, defending national champ, to get to the Sweet 16 2 years ago. Kansas is always at the top of the best conference in basketball, the Big 12. The SEC is going to have something to say about that this year. 16 teams now, with a Texas and OU added, 10 projected right now by Lenardi to make the NCAA tournament. Of course, we're so far away from what reality is, but that's what it looks like on paper, at least, and that's more than any other league he's got projected. Where does Arkansas fit into that? I still think Arkansas is a top 3 or 4 team in this league when you look at it going into it, if everybody's healthy. But you're going to get that exhibition test, whether you got all players on the floor or not. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, and then we're going to start to think about some of these projections and talking points, and how much of it had water and weight, and how much of it's like, wow, they got a long way to go to fulfill some of these expectations.
Yeah, and I think that's why Cal has preached patience so much, right? It might even be they come out and they play phenomenal against Kansas, and the expectations somehow even jump further than they are, and then they might turn around 1 week later and look like a not very good basketball team against TCU in another exhibition. It's just when you have this many new players, this many new faces coming in, that's why he's preached patience over and over and over again, is they quite simply have to figure out how to play together, and that's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I mean, it's a heck of a test right off the bat with Kansas, but that's how you know where you are. You test yourself, you give yourself a measuring stick, because there's not going to be many teams more talented and many teams more deep than Kansas the entire year, even with how good the Razorback schedule is coming up.
I lost you for a second there. You still with me?
Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah, it froze up. I think I heard maybe most of what you said at the end there. I think the biggest thing is when you lump those games together, Kansas, TCU, even Lipscomb, the mid-major that really had a chance to beat Arkansas in the final minute in North Little Rock last year, and then Baylor, the 8th-ranked team, at a neutral site at the end of the first week of the first week of the start of the regular season. You've got 4 games there that, in theory, there's not one of those you can point to and say, and then, of course, the exhibition games don't count. And you're really using those to measure what you need to work on, what is working, and those things. But between those 4 games, it's not like you're playing a ton of cupcakes in Division IIs and exhibition season before you start to reveal what's ugly and what's pretty. You're going to find out really, really fast. And I think in a lot of ways that benefits John Calipari. And it's a better way to approach your scheduling than how it's been done traditionally, where you just slowly, the idea you're going to build confidence by knocking off, rent-a-wins. I like this approach better. It may sting for fans. It may not. We don't know yet. But it's not the end of the world either. That's the point. But no matter what happens in those 4 outings, by the time you get to the end of the first week of the college basketball season, you've still got 30 games plus, when you count postseason, ahead of you, and a lot of areas where you can make improvement where it's needed, but then build on some of the things that are working.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one thing, right? You could beat every team by 40 and everybody feels great. You're playing a whole bunch of non-Power 5 opponents, or however you want to phrase it. But I think it's this way, and Cal has talked about this over and over again. This is how you find the warts of your team early, right? And how you work through things before the brunt of conference play arrives, because conference play is not going to be kind to the Razorbacks when you talk about how deep the SEC is. But regardless,
No.
a massive test with Kansas on deck on Friday. Anything else you want to hit, Jayhawks and Hogs, before we go, Kevin?
Not really, other than we remember the atmosphere last year
Yeah.
with Purdue. It's a treat.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we talked about the practicality of it, but just someone that's taken that in, whether you're in the media or you're a fan, yeah, you wish it counted. You wish there was the net rating bump. And if you win, you get it's really good on your resume and you start out. That's all true. It will not subtract from the energy in that building. There's no football game on campus that weekend. And the football game on the road is a day later. So it's all basketball on campus, and it's the number one team in the country. I don't care if it's an exhibition game. The energy,
Yeah.
that place is going to be packed. Big Blue Nation's been poking fun at the crowd sizes at the two tip-off tour events. So my final thought is, they can look on and
Yeah.
envy that atmosphere because it's going to be crazy.
Yeah. Take that as a personal challenge, Hog fans. Pack it out, 20,000 plus from Big Blue Nation in Bud Walton come Friday. Heck of a matchup. I love these charity exhibitions. It was a great idea whoever finally put their heads together and said, hey, this would be a great way to raise money for, charities for good causes and allow us an opportunity to have number 16, number 1 before the season even starts. Get a great look at both these teams. It's going to be so much fun Friday night inside Bud Walton. But that's all the time we have on this week's Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. We'll talk to you next Sunday.